For 38 years, the workshop behind my house on Clover Hill Road was where I made sense of the world. I could run my hand along a piece of white oak and tell you within a quarter inch where the grain would split. My son used to sit on the old milk crate in the corner when he was 7 years old, watching me sand cabinet doors until they were smooth as river stones. And he would say, "Dad, how do you always know what the wood wants?" I told him the same thing my father told me. You listen. You pay attention. The wood tells you everything if you slow down long enough to hear it. I wish I had applied that same patience to reading people. My name is Harold, and I am 62 years old. I spent 4 decades building custom cabinetry and furniture for homes across western Pennsylvania. I am not a frail man. I chop my own firewood. I walk 3 miles every morning before the rest of the neighborhood wakes up. When my doctor told me last spring that my left knee needed to be replaced, bone on bone, the cartilage simply gone, I treated it like a project with a timeline. 6 weeks at the rehabilitation center in Pittsburgh, physical therapy twice a day, and then back home. Simple as that. What I did not plan for was coming home to find my entire life packed into black garbage bags on the front porch. But I am getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what this house means to me before you can understand what happened the day I came back to it. I built that house with my own hands in 1987. Not a contractor, not a crew, me, my brother-in-law at the time, and 2 weekends a month for almost 2 years. Every door frame, every windowsill, every piece of trim in that house passed through my workshop first. My late wife, Carol, picked out the kitchen tile herself. She stood in the showroom for 40 minutes holding 2 nearly identical samples of cream-colored ceramic up to the fluorescent light, and I stood there without a single complaint because watching her care that much about something made me happy. We raised our son, Garrett, in that house. I taught him to ride his bike in the driveway. We buried the family dog under the oak tree in the backyard. Carol passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. The house got quieter after that, but it never stopped feeling like home. Garrett is 34 now. He works in commercial real estate in Pittsburgh, about an hour and 20 minutes from Clover Hill Road. He married a woman named Diane 4 years ago. She is polished and well-dressed and talks very fast about things I do not always follow: investment portfolios, brand positioning, her spin class instructor. She has never once asked me about the workshop. In 4 years of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, she has never walked back there, never picked up a piece of wood, never asked what I was building. I noticed that early on. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself a lot of things that did not turn out to be true. When the surgery was scheduled for March, Garrett drove me to Pittsburgh himself. He helped me check in, carried my bag to the room, sat with me until the nurses came to prep me. He seemed like himself that day, a little distracted, checking his phone more than I would have liked, but present enough. Before he left, he squeezed my shoulder and said, "I'll be back to get you when they release you, Dad." 6 weeks goes fast. I believed him. I had no reason not to. The 6 weeks at the rehabilitation center were harder than I expected and easier than they could have been. The staff there were kind, particularly a physical therapist named Marcus, who had the patience of a saint and a way of pushing me exactly as hard as I needed without making me feel like an old man. I did my exercises. I walked the hallways with the walker, then with the cane, then on my own. I called Garrett every Sunday evening. The calls were short. He was always just finishing dinner or just heading somewhere, but he answered, and he asked how the knee was feeling. And that seemed like enough. On the day of my discharge, I called him at 7 in the morning. He did not pick up. I left a message. I called again at 9. Voicemail. My discharge was scheduled for 11 o'clock, and by 10:30 I was sitting in the lobby in my street clothes with my bag at my feet, watching the automatic doors open and close for other people's families. At 10:55, Garrett sent a text message. I still have it saved on my phone. "Dad, really sorry. Something came up with work. Huge deal we've been chasing for months. Diane can't make it either. I called a car service. They should be there by 11:30. I'll call you later tonight. I sat with that message for a long moment. A car service. After 6 weeks. After open heart, no, not heart. After a surgery that put me on a walker for a month. After I called him twice that morning. I thanked the lobby receptionist, whose name was Brenda, and who had given me a hard candy from her desk every single morning of my stay. And I told her my son had been held up. She looked at me in a way I recognized the look people give you when they feel sorry for you and are trying very hard not to show it. I told her I would figure it out. I did not wait for the car service. I walked to the rental desk in the hospital's connected medical building, showed them my license and my credit card, and rented a mid-sized sedan for 2 days. My knee was stiff in the driver's seat for the first 15 minutes. By the time I reached the highway, I had found a comfortable position and the radio was playing an old Merle Haggard song, and for a few miles I almost felt normal. I did not feel normal for long. I spent most of the drive home building the conversation in my head. I was not going to come in angry. I was not that kind of man. And more importantly, I was not going to give Diane the satisfaction of seeing me come through the door with my face red. I was going to set my bag down in the kitchen, make myself a cup of coffee, and have a direct and calm conversation with my son about what it means to show up for your family. I had that whole conversation scripted before I hit the Clover Hill Road exit. None of it mattered. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Garrett's car parked at the curb. That surprised me. I thought he had a work emergency. Then I noticed something else. There were 4 large black garbage bags lined up along the front porch railing. I sat in the rental car for a moment, engine running, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I got out. The bags were tied shut, but I could see the shape of things inside them. The corner of my old flannel shirt, the spine of a hardcover book I recognized as my father's Bible, the handle of a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to Carol's mother. These were not trash bags. These were my things. I tried my key in the front door. It did not turn. I stood there on my own front porch, on a Tuesday afternoon in early May, with a cane in my left hand and a rental car in my driveway, and I could not open my own front door. Then the upstairs window opened. Diane leaned out. She was wearing the kind of workout clothes that cost more than my first car payment, and her expression was not embarrassed or uncertain. It was flat, decided, like she had rehearsed this moment and was simply delivering it. "Harold," she said, "we've talked about this with Garrett. The house is too big for one person, and frankly it's wasted out here. We've made a decision about the property and we need you to make other arrangements. Your essentials are in the bags. The rest of your things are in the garage, and we'll have someone contact you about coordinating pickup." I looked up at her for a long moment. I am a man who chooses his words carefully, and right then I chose not to use any of them. "Where is my son?" I said. It was not a question. It was a sentence. "He's inside." He agrees with this, Harold. It's not personal. It's practical. You're going to need more support as you get older anyway. And send him out, I said. There was a pause. Then Diane's head disappeared from the window. I waited. 2 minutes passed. 3. Garrett did not come out. I picked up my phone and I did 3 things in the next 4 minutes that I want to be very clear about, because those 3 things are the reason that, by the following Friday, my son and his wife were the ones making other arrangements. The first thing I did was call my neighbor, Ray, who lives 2 houses down and has known me since Carol was alive. I told him where I was standing and what I was looking at and asked him to come over. He said he would be there in 5 minutes. He brought his wife, Patricia. The second thing I did was call my attorney. His name is David Kowalski, and I have worked with him for over 20 years since I incorporated my cabinetry business, through the estate process after Carol died, and through the drafting of my will 4 years ago. David picked up on the second ring. I told him what I had come home to. He told me not to move, not to touch the bags, and to take photographs of everything: the bags on the porch, the door, the window, whatever I could document. He also told me something that I suspect Garrett and Diane had not bothered to verify before they changed the locks. The house was in my name only. I had never transferred the deed, never added Garrett to the title, never refinanced in a way that brought his name into any legal document connected to this property. The house on Clover Hill Road was as legally mine as the day I poured the foundation. The third thing I did was start taking photographs. Ray and Patricia arrived. Ray did not say much. He is not a man who talks when action is available. He stood next to me on the porch with his arms crossed while Patricia put her hand on my arm and said, in a very quiet voice, "Harold, you know you're coming home with us tonight." I told her I appreciated that. I also told her I didn't think it would come to that. David called back within 30 minutes. He had already spoken to a colleague who specialized in unlawful lockout cases. What Garrett and Diane had done changing the locks on a property they had no legal ownership of and removing my belongings without my consent was not a gray area. It was a straightforward violation of Pennsylvania property law. My attorney told me he was filing an emergency order that afternoon. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant standing in that driveway. I want to tell you that knowing I held the legal advantage made everything feel resolved and clean. But that is not what I felt. What I felt was something much harder to name, a grief that had nothing to do with the house. I had built that house with my hands. I had raised my son in it. I had sat at that kitchen table with him through his first heartbreak and his college applications and the morning we buried his mother. And he had stood inside it that afternoon while his wife leaned out the window and told me to make other arrangements, and he had not come to the door. That was the thing the documents and the legal filings could not touch. I stayed with Ray and Patricia for 3 nights. On the second morning, I sat at their kitchen table drinking coffee while Patricia made eggs and Ray read the paper. And I thought about what my father used to say about hardwood versus softwood. Hardwood is denser, heavier, harder to work with, but it holds. A piece of white oak can carry weight for 100 years. Softwood is easier to shape, but it gives under pressure. I thought about my son. I thought about the kind of wood he had become. On the third day, Garrett called me. I picked up on the 4th ring. I wanted him to hear the pause. I wanted him to sit in the silence of 4 rings and think about what he was calling to say. He sounded different than I expected. Not angry, not defensive. Smaller, somehow. He told me that David Kowalski's office had served him with legal notice that morning. He told me that the locks were being changed back to my locks, my keys, by the end of the day. He told me that Diane had not fully understood the property situation when she made the decision, that it had happened fast, that he was sorry. I let him finish. Then I told him that I heard him. I told him that I would return to my house, and that I intended to continue living there, and that the legal proceedings would continue regardless because what had been done needed to be on record. I told him that I was not unreachable, and I was not done being his father, but that I needed him to understand something clearly. I am 62 years old, not 90. I split my own firewood. I drove myself home from Pittsburgh on a knee that was 6 weeks out of surgery. I am not a burden waiting to happen, and I will not be managed or maneuvered or quietly relocated like an inconvenience. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "I know, Dad. I know." I moved back into my house on a Thursday. Ray and David met me there. A locksmith hired by my attorney, billed to the legal proceedings, changed the locks back and provided me with 3 new keys. I walked through every room slowly, not because I was looking for damage, but because I needed to feel the house be mine again. The kitchen was the same. The tile that Carol had chosen was still there. The cabinet doors I had built and hung myself, leveled to within a 1/16 of an inch, were still straight. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a long time, and I let the quiet of the house settle around me. I found out later from Ray, who has a talent for knowing the shape of things without being told, that Garrett and Diane had been planning to list the property. A real estate attorney, friend of Diane's, had told her that a house like mine, on a lot like mine, in a market that had appreciated the way Western Pennsylvania's had, was worth significantly more than I probably realized. What Diane had apparently not mentioned to her friend, or perhaps had not thought to verify herself, was the small matter of whose name was on the deed. The legal proceedings were resolved by the end of June. Garrett and Diane were required to cover the costs of the emergency lockout order and the associated legal fees. That amount was not inconsiderable. More significant to me was the formal documentation of what had occurred, the photographs, the witness statements from Ray and Patricia, the text message from Garrett telling me a car service would come instead of him. All of it. Documented. All of it real. Diane left for her parents' house in Ohio in the second week of June. I learned that from Garrett himself, when he showed up on a Saturday morning in late June without calling first. I was in the workshop when I heard his car in the driveway. I kept working for a moment. I was cutting mortises for a new side table, a project I had started during my recovery as something to look forward to, and then I set down the chisel and walked out to meet him. He looked like he had not been sleeping well. There were shadows under his eyes that I recognized because I had seen them in the mirror the week after Carol died. He was carrying a bag from the bakery in town, a white paper bag, the kind they use for the cinnamon rolls Carol used to love. He held it out to me like a peace offering, which I suppose it was. I took the bag. I told him to come inside. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. I did not do most of the talking, which was deliberate. I listened. I let him tell me what the past year had looked like from where he was standing, the pressure at work, the way Diane had convinced him that moving me would be better for everyone, the way he had told himself that a care facility or a smaller apartment would be an upgrade for me rather than an erasure. I listened to all of it without interrupting, and then I told him that I understood how a person can convince themselves that a wrong thing is a practical thing, and that I did not need him to keep explaining. But I also told him this: if he ever again made a decision about my life without talking to me, if he ever again stood inside my house while someone else told me I was not welcome in it, that would be a door I might not be able to open back up, not because I did not love him, but because love without respect is not love at all. It is management, and I was nobody's project. He nodded. He did not argue with any of it. We ate the cinnamon rolls. They were good. The bakery in town uses brown butter in the icing, something Carol would have appreciated. We talked about the table I was building in the workshop. I showed him the mortise joints, the grain of the wood, the way I had matched the figure across the 2 side panels, so it looked like one continuous piece. He looked at it for a long time. "I always forget how good you are at this," he said. "You forget a lot of things," I said. "That is something we are both going to have to work on." He laughed. It was the first time in months I had heard my son laugh, and even though it was short, even though there was something uncertain at the edges of it, it was real. I held on to that. The summer moved forward the way summers do in western Pennsylvania, slowly, and then all at once, the light changing before you realize it's already August. I finished the side table. I started on a blanket chest for a neighbor down the road, cherry wood with hand-cut dovetails. My knee was stronger. I walked my 3 miles every morning. I had David Kowalski draw up a revised estate plan that made my intentions unambiguous and left no room for the kind of assumptions that had been made in the spring. Garrett called more often. The calls were longer. In July, he drove out on a Sunday and helped me stack firewood for the winter without being asked. We did not talk much while we worked, but the silence was the comfortable kind, 2 people who understand each other well enough to not need to fill every moment with words. When we were done, he washed his hands at the outdoor spigot and looked out at the property, the workshop, the oak tree at the back of the yard. "Mom planted those daylilies along the fence," he said. "She did," I said. "Took her 3 seasons to get them to come in the way she wanted." He nodded. We stood there for a moment in the late afternoon light, and I thought about the conversation I used to have with my son when he was 7 years old, sitting on that milk crate in the workshop, asking me how I knew what the wood wanted. "You listen," I had told him. "You pay attention." I think, standing at that fence in July, he was starting to understand what I meant. Some things cannot be repaired. I know that. I am not a man who pretends that what happened in May was a small thing, or that the image of those garbage bags on my porch will ever fully leave me. There are moments, still quiet mornings before the coffee is done, or late evenings when the workshop light is the only thing on in the yard when I feel the weight of it, not as anger, more like the memory of a cold room that you have since warmed, but that you know once let the cold all the way in. But I am here. I am in my house. The tile in the kitchen is the same tile Carol chose in 1987. The cabinet doors hang level. The oak tree in the backyard is the same tree we planted the year Garrett was born, and it is taller now than the roof line, and in the summer it puts enough shade on the back of the house that I do not need to run the window unit until August. I did not build this life to have it taken from me by a misreading of who I am and what I am capable of. I am not a burden. I am not a problem to be solved. I am a man with a workshop and a good attorney and a neighbor who came over in 5 minutes flat when I called him, and I want anyone who is listening to remember that, because I had the deed, and in the end, that was all I needed.